All right, welcome back in here to Live and Now from Fox. I'm Andy Mack. Let's turn our attention internationally as we're following the latest between Israel and Iran as President Donald Trump earlier today vetoed a plan presented by Israel to the United States to kill Iran's supreme leader. The Israelis informed the Trump administration in recent days that they had developed a credible plan to kill the Ayatollah. You can see this, a post coming in as the Associated Press, a U.S. official telling them as President Trump vetoed an Israeli plan in the recent days to kill the supreme leader of Iran. And after being briefed on the plan, the White House made clear to Israeli officials that President Trump was opposed to making Israelis making the move. The Trump administration is desperate to keep Israel's military operation aimed at decapitating Iran's nuclear program from exploding into an even more expansive conflict, and saw the plan to kill the Ayatollah as a move that would inflame the conflict and potentially destabilize the region. All right, let's bring into the conversation right now JINSA President and CEO Michael Makovsky. Michael, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And of course, we're talking about this, President Trump vetoing a plan for Israel to take out the supreme leader of Iran. Why do you think he made that decision?
First of all the fathers out there, wish everybody happy Father's Day. Look, I mean, Netanyahu, the prime minister, was on Fox News today with Bret Baier, and he did not confirm that, by the way, that story. But I think, you know, if the story is true, I can understand the U.S. reticence for that. It could be seen as, you know, just too provocative, maybe, of an action. I think, if I may, I think well, there are two things. The main objective, they have Israel has two main objectives right now. It's to destroy as much as possible of Iran's nuclear program, so it can't be easily reconstituted. And that doesn't just mean the infrastructure, but it also means the personnel. So they've also killed a lot of senior nuclear scientists. And the second is also to decapitate basically the senior military and intelligence leadership, the third one I would say is taking care of the ballistic missile threat, which has really been growing. So you're not going to have these ballistic missile attacks, which the Iranians are firing not at military targets, but at Israeli civilian targets. So I think those have been Israel's top three priorities right now.
And when we talk about this, how the Israelis informed President Trump that they had developed a credible plan to kill the Ayatollah, what would that look like? Does Israel have the capability? We know we saw them take out some nuclear sites. Do they have the capability to go that far? And will that window present itself again potentially?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. One thing I think it's safe to say, based on what we've seen with the Israelis the last few days, what we saw with Israel, how they handled Hezbollah and decapitated Hezbollah leadership in Lebanon, and with the walkie-talkies and the pagers also, I wouldn't underestimate what the Israelis could achieve. I think it's been amazing. It's what they've achieved in terms of how many senior leaders they've been able to assassinate, even within the first few minutes of this operation starting Thursday night, U.S. time. So I don't know what they could do, but I wouldn't doubt that they could do it. But I think what's been very clear, and we saw this also on the Bret Baier's interview with Netanyahu today. Look, Netanyahu, and I've heard this privately from Israelis for months, they're not saying that they seek regime change, but they clearly are hoping that all this, what they're doing, is going to further weaken the regime and that people will rise up and get rid of them, because that's really the ultimate solution here. It's not just the weapons that the regime has, it's the regime itself. We don't worry about America having nuclear weapons. We don't really worry about Israel having nuclear weapons, even though they don't admit it publicly. But we do worry about the leading sponsor of terror having an awful arsenal. So ultimately, you want this regime to collapse, but you just don't know what's going to trigger it. And it has to come from the Iranian people.
I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned the conversation between Bret Baier and Netanyahu, and that was the question that really perked my interest about the regime change. Would that be a best case scenario that Iran does it themselves?
Absolutely. Israel's not going to do it. I mean, even if they took out the supreme leader, that wouldn't necessarily mean regime change. It's Iran's a serious country. It's not like even like Hezbollah. And, someone else will come to the fore. It could be someone even worse than the supreme leader. So you don't really know. But it's the regime that needs to collapse. And that has to come from the Iranian people. There have been uprisings over the years. Even before this attack by Israel, there was some trucker strikes. They're constantly having strikes. The regime is clearly very weak. It's one of the reasons I think Israel is attacking now. It's not just Iran's advances in its nuclear program, but it's because it realizes and it doesn't want Iran to reconstitute their defenses, but it's also because they know the regime is incredibly weak. Look what happened in this past winter or even now. I mean, this is a country was like this one of the top natural gas reserve in the country in the world, and they couldn't even heat homes and government buildings. They had to restrict hours. And then what we saw, how they treat women and what they're doing, they're executing more dissidents now than they used to. The regime is very unpopular by all accounts. But you don't know, political scientists, of which I'm not one, for good reason, think that you could calculate sometimes this thing. You have no idea what will trigger an uprising. The Israelis hope that the Iranians will rise up. But, you never know what will do it. It has to come from the Iranian people.
And speaking of timing of all of this, this comes as talks kind of off and on. They were supposed to be taking place today, Sunday, in Oman about kind of silencing that nuclear program with Iran. Does it mean we're closer to a potential deal, or are we as far as we've ever been? Where do we stand on that?
I don't see a deal. I don't see the Iranians negotiating under these conditions. They're very, I mean, they'd have to be really severely weakened and much more, I think, than they are now. So I'm not, I think they're very conscious of not negotiating from point of weakness. So I'd be very surprised I mean, at some point, how does this end? I guess is what you're really asking. And, you could see some sort of arrangement, some sort of armistice when Israel feels like they've accomplished enough, and then there might be some arrangement with some other powers, involved. But I don't see a deal.
All right, and just speaking maybe a little bit to that tune about the United States and their involvement. Of course, President Trump, in communication with Netanyahu, with the Israelis, had the power to veto a potential strike, although Netanyahu denying that. How much more does the United States need to get involved at all? And would that change the complexion? How would that change the complexion, and how would that look?
Yeah, to me, that's the key question. And I think the answer is yes. And I think, look, when the attack started on Thursday night American time, East Coast time here, Rubio said there's a unilateral strike and distance themselves. I think that was personally, I thought it was a mistake. We've had 5 successive presidents, Democrats and Republicans, say they vowed to end a nuclear Iran. So it's been a core U.S. interest. So now that Israel is trying to do that militarily, we're going to step aside like we have been, acting like almost like bystanders and say, this is for the Israelis to do. Well, I think even if you don't care about the Middle East and you only care about China, and there are those Republicans who feel that way, I think that's a huge mistake, because if you're the Chinese and you see America that is not going to do what is necessary to secure a core interest to prevent a nuclear Iran that we've been talking about, presidents have been talking about for 30 years, then why would you take America seriously? And if you're not going to, and how would our allies look at this, like the Saudis and the Japanese, if they see that America will not even stand by its close ally? And I don't mean just stand by and help defend on the defensive side, but really help them. So I think, to answer your question, what the most important thing, and I think for the important thing is that America, that Trump needs to understand, it's in our interest, and he understands that, but I think he really needs to internalize it more. It's in our interest that Israel succeeds. It's in our interest that other countries like Russia and China see that we're going to help Israel, and that we're going to advance our own interests. And I think concretely what that means is we have to help the Israelis on destroying Fordow. That's the one nuclear facility that's very deeply buried. The Israelis don't have the capability that we have with the B-2s and the 30,000 bombs. That's where I think Trump could really help. And I think, again, it would help make this mission a success, but it would be a terrific signal that will help him for the rest of his pregnancy by signaling the Chinese and other adversaries is that we're going to advance our security interests.
And you mentioned just the continuity of thought, the shared kind of goals in terms of that. JINSA does have issued an open letter of 68 retired U.S. generals, admirals calling on the U.S. government to publicly support Israel's action and ensure its success in permanently dismantling Iran's nuclear program. How much support is there in the United States for that to come to fruition?
By the way, we collected those signatures in 2 days. It was an ad in the New York Post. We could get more if we do a day, so we just cut it off. But those are very prominent retired U.S. generals and admirals that signed that letter. Look, I think most Americans, I think there was a Harvard Harris poll, if I'm not mistaken, just the other day that suggested overwhelming U.S. support, American support for what Israel is doing. I can't remember, it was around 75%, give or take. Look, Iran is unpopular. I think most Americans understand this. It's not even like the Palestinian issue. There's a lot of sympathy here for the Iranians, and people understand that a country like Iran cannot threaten a genocidal country that keeps talking about wiping out Israel, but they also are developing ICBMs so they can deliver nuclear weapons to our eastern seaboard. This is why I think Steve Witkoff, Trump's close buddy and senior official, said last week that a nuclear Iran is not only an existential threat to Israel, but an existential threat to the United States. And once you have senior officials talking that way, that means we have to act accordingly. And I think, again, all our allies and all our adversaries are watching. And that means I think we have to help Israel to do what it cannot. And I think the most important thing would be on Fordow, using our B-2s with the mobs. And if there are other ways we could help Israel, we should do that. But I think that would help our interests the most. And if we try to hide behind it and say this is Israel's fight and not ours, I think it's a terrible posture that's going to severely undermine our credibility.
And we've seen some of the back channel conversations happen already, so we'll see if they step up to that. I want to ask you, because this also comes in terms of what we're seeing with the G7, as you mentioned, some of those allies coming together. What are the conversations going to be like there amongst President Trump and other world leaders?
Yeah. By the way, I want to clarify. I commend Trump for a few things. I commend him for, green lighting this attack, being part of the deception with the Israelis on the time of the attack, helping, like Biden did, defend Israeli airspace. So I don't want to minimize any of that. I just think he needs to do one more thing. I assume when Trump has these conversations with these leaders in Canada, I think they're going to talk about de-escalation, blah, blah, blah. These are not serious discussions. The question is, I assume that's what the kind of thing they're going to be talking about, because that's what they've said. But frankly, to be very candid, anyone who talks like that is being irresponsible. The Iranians have missiles that could hit Europe. If they develop nuclear weapons, they could threaten, European capitals. Unfortunately, as we've seen in other ways, the European countries don't really do enough, the West European countries, to defend their interests. Here you have Israel defending its interests and showing everybody what that means. And I think it's a real model, because what Israel is doing, it's defending Paris, also defending London, and defending Washington. It's doing it not to defend those capitals. It's doing it because it defends itself. But Israel's on the front line of this fight, and it's in all these Western countries' interests, and I hope they realize it. I think the opposition leader of Canada said something like, if Israel takes out these nuclear weapons, it'd be a gift to the world. And I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, that would be a good sign for the
Prime
world.
Minister.
Yeah, on the world stage. This happened 48 hours ago, the escalation as they were lobbying back and forth. What happened in the next 48 hours? What comes this week? What do we expect to happen?
Well, one thing we could expect is the unexpected, obviously, because the Israelis, I think, have surprised many of us who even follow it closely about what they've done and how successful they've been. Clearly, an immediate focus which they've been clearly focusing on today and yesterday, especially with the air superiority they've achieved in the western part of Iran from Tehran to the west, is to really make sure to destroy as many of these ballistic missiles as possible and the launchers, so that Iran cannot keep terrorizing the Israeli population. So that's for sure. I think they're going to keep hitting these nuclear facilities, and you might see, I think, more of attacks on the civilian infrastructure. I think the refineries is a very interesting thing for them to attack. They started doing that after the Iranians started hitting U.S. Israeli civilian centers, and Israel said, "Okay, you do that." Israel has not hit civilian centers, but they've hit. And I think the refineries is interesting because it puts a lot of pressure on the regime if there's a far less gasoline in the country or natural gas. So I think we might see more of that. I think they'll probably refrain unless they're really forced to hit the oil export facilities, because that would affect the United States economy and the global economy, and I think Israel doesn't want to do that. But I think that's for expected what we'll hit. We'll see, but beyond that, I think we'll see the unexpected. We'll have to talk about that.
Expect the unexpected. Michael Makovsky, thank you for breaking it all down. A new week. We're entering a new week. This is a new phase. We'll see what comes of it. Thanks again for joining us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. Great conversation there. As always, as we're following this.